Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, very glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We actually have a good martini, but we're going to save it for the end. It's going to go bad, crazy, good today. And Jim, let's start with the bad, although there's good news that there's been an arrest in this case, but the overall story, not good at all. Many different people reporting on it. Here's the Free Beacon story. A former aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul and disgraced former Governor Andrew Cuomo was arrested and charged on Tuesday with acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. Linda Sun, Hochul's former deputy chief of staff, was charged with, quote, violating and conspiring to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act, visa fraud, alien smuggling, and money laundering conspiracy. The FBI arrested her and her husband, Christopher Hu, at their $3.5 million Long Island home early Tuesday morning. Hu was also charged in the case with money laundering and fraud conspiracies, and they appeared yesterday before a federal judge in Brooklyn. Meanwhile, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who had, again, this woman as deputy chief of staff, earlier in her work with the New York governor's office, she served as Deputy Chief Diversity Officer for Andrew Cuomo. So Hochul was asked about this yesterday. She says she's shocked and appalled, but by Kathy Hochul standards, Jim, this is actually a fairly coherent statement. And she also said something about Taiwan that I think we would appreciate.
Absolutely shocking. And she has been in government for many, many years, even prior to the time I became governor, where she was involved in making a lot of decisions related to the relationship between the administration at the time and the Chinese government, promoting Chinese, viewpoints and giving them proclamations and visas, and actually at the same time really diminishing any involvement with the country of Taiwan. It is shocking in its scale. I'm glad we were able to see some evidence that was, didn't look right to us, and we immediately alerted the authorities, and hence we have this outcome. And I would just say this. To think that any foreign agent, any foreign government has the audacity to infiltrate a government organization like the state of New York has to be addressed with.
Okay, first of all, the grammar's not great, but she made a couple of good points there. The idea that she's shocked that the Chinese would try to infiltrate a government organization in the United States, ask Eric Swalwell whether the Chinese do that sort of thing. To make a note here, she was fired in 2023 after officials found evidence of misconduct, so that's why you're hearing Hochul take credit for her no longer being on her staff by the time of her arrest. Apparently, this Linda Sun worked for California Congresswoman Grace Meng back when Meng was in the California state legislature. So the tentacles run even beyond New York state politics. So, Jim, we've certainly seen Chinese hacking. We've seen Chinese infiltration before. What do you make of this latest episode?
Yeah, I mean, Greg, this wasn't in the sound clip that you played, but my understanding is that Governor Hochul said that the Chinese government bribing and effectively turning state officials into their own agents of influence within a state government is as shocking as gambling at Rick's. That's how shocking. Shocked, I tell you. And yes, in that statement, you could definitely pick up a whiff of, hey, don't blame me. I inherited this staffer from Cuomo. It's all Cuomo's fault. She was just here when I got here, But three magic words, country of Taiwan. Good for you, Governor Hochul. Let's wait. First of all, my sneaking suspicion is this is not the last we've heard on this story. You have a very hard time believing that once the Chinese government had found a U.S. official willing to give inside access and effectively act on their behalf within the state government in exchange for a couple millions of dollars. I don't know if this is specific to this case, but as somebody put it, wouldn't the Lamborghini be your first clue for a state official? Something's up. My suspicion is this is not the only one. What you would want to get as many agents of influence as possible in as many places as possible. So I don't know whether this is going to happen in other states or something like that. My contempt and disdain for the Chinese government is hard to express in words, but I can't blame them for buying when so many of our elected officials are selling. That is, that's the core of the problem right there. And if we had elected officials and people working for government with more integrity, we wouldn't have these problems, but we'll see what happens. So that does not seem to me like the answer of a governor who feels like she's next. And by the way, if you'd said, somebody at Kathy Hochul's staff got caught working for the Chinese, very few of us would have been shocked if we hadn't seen a Bob Menendez approach. Oh, this is an outrage, this is a witch hunt. This is all the Department of Justice and their partisan right-wing agenda to get me. And we didn't get that from Kathy Hochul. So I guess that's kind of the silver lining to this, a molecule or two of credit to her, but it still really is a problem. And you kind of look, there are a lot of people in government, mostly on the Democratic side, but not exclusively, who really have no problem making the argument on behalf of China and the Chinese government and greater outreach. And, we can cooperate. And we can all sing from the same songbook. Who put it that way? Oh, that's right, Tim Walz. On any one of his 35 trips to China we don't know who paid for him. Could have been anybody. I'm sure that, he just had tons of money sitting around for all that airfare going back to Beijing, back and forth all those times. Look, we'll see what happens. We will see if there are additional indictments. I'm glad that this one is caught. But a sneaking suspicion, this is, if not the tip of the iceberg, then we have not seen the last of Chinese influence operations. Also, check out the Washington Post, big story yesterday, and unfortunately it wasn't on the front page today, looking at, or on the front page of the website today at least, looking at the violence surrounding the Pacific Summit out in San Francisco last November. A lot of thugs beating up democracy activists on the streets of San Francisco. Surprise, surprise, a lot of these people beating the people up had ties to the Chinese government. And so we talk about threats to the First Amendment. How about you say F word Xi Jinping, and then a bunch of guys come and beat you bloody and leave you unconscious in the street? We're talking about threats to the First Amendment. Who runs the streets of San Francisco? Who's in charge? Because it certainly looks like the Chinese government is these days. No,
and a lot of different ways. And of course, they cleaned up San Francisco, so Xi Jinping could have a nice drive.
Well, the boss is coming.
So better than usual for Kathy Hochul, but the bar's really, really low. But I'm sure if she doesn't have to apologize for calling Taiwan a country by the end of the week, I'll be satisfied
that's what passes for rock-ribbed in Democratic circles these days.
All right. Well, the idea of Chinese infiltration makes you want to tip one back. I'm not surprised, but take Z-Biotics first, because when you wake up the next morning, you'll be glad you took Z-Biotics first. You'll feel a whole lot better than you would have otherwise.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, as always, and you will feel your best the following morning.
As my coworker found out, he was starting to get a little bit older and felt a little bit worse in the mornings, but took Z-Biotics, and now he feels great the next day. So go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And I remember the last time we were critical of Tucker Carlson. We got some blowback, but I mean, come on. When something like this happens, you have to talk about it, and it's just absolutely insane. Tucker Carlson has these long-form podcasts, and every time he has somebody on who's kind of fringy or really fringy, as in this case, and there's any criticism, you're taking it out of context, and you're brainwashed by the globalists or something. But when you get to the point of Winston Churchill was the chief villain in World War II, and the Holocaust was just this happenstance thing where Hitler invaded Russia, and then he had all these prisoners. What are you going to do with them? You're going to let them starve to death, or are you going to be merciful and just off them right there? This guy's name is Daryl Cooper, and here's first of all what he has to say about Churchill.
I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Now, he didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities. But I believe, and I think when you really get into it and tell the story right and don't leave anything out, you see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did, becoming something other than an invasion of Poland.
Yeah, and in a subsequent Twitter thread, he says that the problem was that Churchill wouldn't play ball with Hitler and come to an agreement on, quote unquote, the Jewish problem. And then completely ignoring all volumes of history about the Nazis having orders to kill communist officials and kill Jews as they made the invasion into Russia in the summer of 1941. Here's Cooper's explanation of how we got so many dead bodies in death camps.
You know, Germany, look, they put themselves into a position, and Adolf Hitler is chiefly responsible for this, but his whole regime is responsible for it, that when they went into the East in 1941, they launched a war where they were completely unprepared to deal with the millions and millions of prisoners of war, of local political prisoners and so forth that they were going to have to handle. They went in with no plan for that. And they just threw these people into camps, and millions of people ended up dead there. You know, you have like letters as early as July, August 1941 from commandants of these makeshift camps that they're setting up for these millions of people who are surrendering or people they're rounding up. And so it's 2 months after, a month or two after Barbarossa was launched. And they're writing back to the high command in Berlin saying, we can't feed these people. We don't have the food to feed these people. And one of them actually says, rather than wait for them all to slowly starve this winter, wouldn't it be more humane to just finish them off quickly now?
Yeah, the humanity of the Nazis, that's really their hallmark, Jim. And so, I mean, it's not like Hitler wrote a book or anything explaining what he wanted to do and who he blamed and the size of this empire, this 1,000-year Reich that he wanted to build. And Neville Chamberlain reached this agreement with Hitler in the fall of 1938. Peace in our time. He's not going to go any further. We split up Czechoslovakia. It's all going to be good. And of course, he invades Poland and then as much of Europe as he could in September of 1939. All starting. So we're basically at the 85th anniversary of that. And so, Jim, I mean, yes, we have political figures in this country accusing each other of being Hitler or like Hitler or doing something similar to what Hitler did. But at least we used to agree that Hitler was bad and that Churchill was the good guy because, you know, he pretty much saved the West there for a while in the 1940s. And so, yes, Tucker Carlson has the right to put these people on. The First Amendment applies to stuff like this, obviously, but doesn't mean you should. And when you get blowback for having stuff like this on, you kind of deserve it.
Yeah. So first of all, regarding our past segments on Tucker Carlson, when we're accused of not giving him the benefit of the doubt for his claim that the U.S. government is in alliance with dark, shadowy, demonic forces that are not UFOs. They are not aliens. They are extra-dimensional. Guilty. We have not given him... No, I have not given that sufficient consideration, unless you count writing the fictional novels about that. Also, the interview with Putin. I did not... I've been accused of being far... too open. I've spoken to a lot of Ukrainians about the experience of the war. I haven't spoken to any Russian soldiers, Greg. And some of that is because they keep shooting missiles at me. So it's kind of hard to get a good answer when they're all that stuff. But on this one, you know, look, you're right. It's a free country. Tucker Carlson can interview whoever he likes. We should know this was not a skeptical pushback interview. This was not, hey, America, I found a real quack. Let's talk to this guy to show you what this nut job thinks. Tucker Carlson raves about this guy. Tucker Carlson says he's the most fascinating and honest historian there is. And just in that last one, I could take these in sequence, but Winston Churchill is the chief villain of World War II. Now, Greg, just off the top of my head, I can think of two. Just in Europe, who I think belong a little higher there. You know, if I did not love Churchill, if I really couldn't stand the guy, I still don't see him taking more than bronze. I really think Mussolini and Hitler, and really, do you want to count Stalin? I think Stalin should be in that mix. So you know what? Churchill, I'm sorry, you don't even make the medal stand. Sorry, that's, you know, better luck next time. But no, you really did not bring your best in the, look, no getting around it. World War II was a tough year if you're competing for chief villain. It was you know, it was the historical villain dream team of that era. I also like the number of times he basically says, other than the invasion of Poland, when we're looking at blame for starting World War II, oh, really? Once we take that out, it's like, other than starting the war, who started the war? I love the euphemism for Jews as local political prisoners. Ah, yes, it was all their political stances that they did. And prisoners of war. Like, where do you think all these people from Germany ended up in camps? What war were they fighting? And the other thing, I think, out of all the absolute nonsense, horsepucky listeners, you know there's other words I want to use. Out of all the stuff he says, the implication that the Holocaust was a result of disorganization. You know, they said, oh, they didn't have a plan for that. Actually, they did. I think, in fact, not only did they have a plan for it, they had a final solution for it. In fact, you know what they called it? The final solution. What do they, trip and fall into the gas chambers? So anyway, so here's the thing. This guy is vomiting forth absolute feces like the Exorcist. And instead of saying, Tucker Carlson saying, I don't think you're right on that. Let me put it this way. There was a point where Kanye West, back when he was wearing the Cobra Commander mask, went on Prison Planet or whatever. What's the Alex Jones show? InfoWars. He goes on InfoWars and he says Hitler did a lot of good things. And even Alex Stop Turning the Frogs Gay Jones was like, actually, I have to say, I've looked at the historical record and no, Hitler really wasn't a good guy. Now, this marks the first time Alex Jones was the sane one in a conversation. You're now in Kanye territory, and Tucker Carlson is telling us, this is the best and most trustworthy historian. Oh, by the way, Kanye West went out and said crazy stuff about the Jews, and Tucker Carlson left that on the cutting room floor. We later found out, right? So Tucker Carlson wants to give you the most shocking thing possible. Also, like, Tucker Carlson doesn't care about the truth. Does not care if they're lying to you. Because if they're worried, if somebody says, well, actually, I think, the Holocaust was because of disorganization. I really think you have an obligation to say, no, that is freaking crazy. And Greg is giggling because he knows how many four-letter words are nearly coming out in a torrent of me right now. So again, and let me point out, you can say, Jim, that's Tucker being Tucker. Why do you guys care? Well, Tucker Carlson did speak at the Republican National Convention last month. Tucker Carlson is scheduled to do an event with J.D. Vance in Hershey, Pennsylvania, later in September. I think it's abundantly clear for a very long time Tucker Carlson has lost his marbles. What I don't know, apparently Tucker Carlson had considerable influence on Donald Trump selecting J.D. Vance over Doug Burgum and all these other options as running mate. Because Tucker Carlson said, if you pick a neocon, the deep state will assassinate you. Now, in Tucker's defense, somebody had just tried to assassinate Donald Trump. That probably was front and center on his mind right now. But Tucker Carlson has a considerable influence in in Trump circles, if not in Republican circles. Stuff like this should make him persona non grata. Because stuff like this should make you say, no, I'm sorry, Tucker, you're not invited to the party anymore. You're not here because you keep hanging out with Nazi apologists. That really doesn't seem like too high a bar to set.
Yeah, I don't know if he's, pushing the edge so far now. He's leaped off or what he's trying to do at this point. But I don't think it's incumbent on the right. Some people, as we get closer to the election, say, can't spend any time criticizing on the right. If you can't criticize this, I think we're done criticizing.
JFK said, party loyalty asks too much. Avert your eyes from the Nazi apologist is asking way too much.
Palate cleanser, as we head into our final martini. We don't usually close with the good martini, but we will in this case. And last night I had the chance with my wonderful father-in-law to go watch Reagan, the movie. Jim got a chance to see it last week, and it is a little over a couple hours long, and it focuses primarily, it goes throughout his entire life, but focuses primarily on his life as a Cold Warrior from his days in Hollywood, which I thought was one of the more fascinating parts of the movie, perhaps because I didn't know it quite as clearly. I knew that's where he certainly fought against the communists back in the 40s and 50s, but I thought that part was very well done. And then on to his speaking tour, working for GE and so forth, governor of California, and also ultimately the presidency of the United States, and the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union within a couple of years after leaving office with his vow to outbuild and outspend the Soviets. They couldn't keep up, and big focus on the Strategic Defense Initiative. And so I was saying to my father-in-law on the way out of the theater, Jim, trying to do Reagan without feeling like a caricature is not easy. And I thought Dennis Quaid did about as well as you could in that situation. I can't remember her name now, but I thought the actress who played Nancy did pretty well. Felt a little contrived in parts, but in the end, I think it told the story well. It's based on the book The Crusader by Paul Kengor, which I highly recommend. Overall, it's just great to see a production where fighting against communism, fighting for traditional values, and I think overall doing a good job of explaining where Reagan was coming from.
I'm going to give a mini podcast within a podcast. I'm going to give you reverse order, crazy, bad, and good. I overall liked it a lot. Not a perfect film, a couple flaws here and there. First, the crazy. Greg, did you stay to the end of the credits?
I did.
Okay, so Reagan has ended his presidential life. He's moving into Nakatomi Plaza, and Nick Fury is there. And he says, "I am the Gipper. Mr. Reagan, you don't realize it, but you just took your first step into a larger universe." And the fact that they're going to create a Reagan cinematic universe with all Coolidge and Teddy Roosevelt and Eisenhower. Coolidge, by the way, is your favorite. So apparently he's playing the silencer. When he sneaks up on the bad guys, nobody hears him coming. So. Okay, I'm making up all of that. But I put this in the Morning Jolt last week, and somebody's like, "That's nonsense." And luckily I put in the link. So the building that is Nakatomi Plaza, Fox Plaza, is actually where Reagan had his post-presidential offices for a few years. And so, yes, he did move into, apparently on the first day that the receptionist wasn't there. So former President Ronald Reagan is answering the phones at his own office on his first day working there. That's kind of funny. So that's my crazy funny answer. Flaws of this movie. I'll just get them out of the way. No doubt it's cheesy. There were certain parts where like Reagan was kind of a cheesy guy. So I don't doubt that this was probably how things shook out. The whole meet cute with Penelope Ann Miller was the actress who played Nancy Reagan. I think she was very good, and I'll talk a bit more about her in the good one. And if there's any flaw, I think you're watching a bunch of these scenes and saying, this could have been a movie by itself. Fighting the communists and the mob in Hollywood back then. Any of the presidential runs, the negotiations with Gorbachev by itself, I think that very much could have well been a movie. That was, you almost get the Cliff Notes version of Reagan's life, and there's almost too much, and you're kind of just dolloping in and getting, and any one of them you could have used a little more. You could have spent more time on it, and it would have been good and entertaining. I didn't mind the framing of the Russians looking at why they lost the Cold War, but I know some people felt like it was a little, hey, because that part is fictional. I think some people felt like it kind of distracted from what is otherwise a very good biopic. And then finally, out to the good and the parts that were best. Well, Dennis Quaid's performance is fantastic. And this is not an easy role to play because the memories of Reagan are so vivid that otherwise you're like, okay, that's an actor playing it. And, I keep just, I was talking about this ironically with my in-laws this past weekend. Ronald, we talk about the Reagan mystique, right? People are like, oh, it's been... Jim, Reagan was president when you were a kid. Why do Republicans still revere him so much? And why is there still this obsession? Why did he set the standard? And why has nobody been able to, been his equal? And I think that it has something to do with that Reagan mystique of like, he did things in politics, particularly communication, that were exceptionally hard. And he made it look easy. In fact, he even kind of made it look effortless, and he could give an address to the country, and everybody felt like he was talking to them specifically. I think Quaid captured that in a way that I haven't seen any other actor do, and so I think that was phenomenal. I like the parts that focused on Reagan's flaws. It was, look, this is a very pro-Reagan movie, but they definitely deal with Iran-Contra. They're very vague on whether he knew about, weapons being shipped over. There's probably like one of the emotional climaxes is during that, and Penelope Ann Miller as Nancy Reagan. It was good to see. Look, we know they're one of the great love stories of the 20th century, but it's good to see tension between them. It's good to see that there were points where they saw things differently, and that there was that tension there. A lot of great performance. If you said to me, Xander Berkeley, formerly of 24, would play George Shultz really well and have two great, by the way, so this is a movie called Reagan. We know what the audience is expecting. And George Shultz goes into the Oval Office and tears Reagan a new one. And he's not like the mustache twirling villain. George Shultz has a point of we've put a lot of effort into getting the Soviets to agree to this deal. And now you're blowing it up. This is building up to the,
tear down that wall.
Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall speech. Every conservative actor in Hollywood is in this. Robert Davi, John Voight, Kevin Sorbo. There's a lot of good stuff in it. And I think, if anything, you could see, another hour and this could have been a miniseries. And I don't know, this is probably, the thing that I'm most glad at is that it, as soon as we heard this movie was being made, we've seen a lot of cheesy political biopics. We've seen a lot of that just turned into cringe-inducing. And this really rose above that on what I understand was a shoestring, budget. And then secondly, I think, I as soon as the trailer came out, my kids are like, oh God, Dad's going to make us watch that opening day. I did not make them watch it opening day. We're waiting for streaming. And then we're all going to sit down as a family and we're going to watch this. Entertaining, good. I think it's a necessary education. It probably doesn't go to the depth. And I think if you're, you and I studying history know a good chunk of that. But easily, Greg, this was the best portrayal of Reagan in pop culture since Call of Duty.
Giving you your mission. Yes, exactly. So, no, I thought it was, again, very good. I thought they were very good on Geneva. They were very good on Reykjavik and explaining what happened there as Reagan walked away over SDI. They didn't actually have the ceremony where they did find the agreement and Gorbachev came to town. I thought that would have been
Reagan's trip to Moscow seems like that would have been because I asked him, Mr. President, are you in an evil empire? He says, oh, no. And it was just kind of this recognition that, the Soviet Union under Gorbachev was a different country than it had been. Oh, by the way, the secrets of Russian leaders. Oh, my God. Hilarious. There was a National Review group, office viewing. We all went to the theater Thursday afternoon. I'm sitting next to my buddy and colleague, Phil Klein, and I think I'm embarrassing him with how hard I am laughing as one Soviet leader dies after another. Look, Russian leaders dying, to me, that's always going to be the feel-good movie of a year. But just, I hope that's not too much of a spoiler. Look, our audience probably saw it this past weekend. But just kind of this recognition. And the other thing is that Korean Airlines 007 coming down. There's some interesting, what they choose to put in there are some interesting and I think under-remembered parts. And again, you probably have to trim this thing to the bone. Interesting, there was no mention of Chernobyl. And I always felt that was a turning point in how the Soviets saw themselves and their faith in themselves and their recognition of, we have the strength to win the Cold War, et cetera. Anyway, it's a movie, and it's a good movie. There are a lot of good Reagan biographies, including the one that this inspired this book, that if you really want to get to know this stuff, that probably is better for a fuller edification of that chapter of history.
Yeah, Craig Shirley's written a ton of books, really good ones, especially about the 76 and 80 campaigns. You mentioned the Korean airliner. I wish, and I know they were tight on time anyway, but the passionate denunciation that Reagan had in that speech, I would have loved to see a few lines of that in there as well. But overall, again, like you said, it's certainly cheesy at times, but I think it crystallizes good and bad. Reagan was so clear about good and bad, the evil empire, and now everything's so muddled now. We just talked about the Biden administration. Well, Israel's got the right to defend itself, but
but use the smaller bombs.
Right.
Don't use the big bombs.
Reagan didn't get into all that. He was just like, we win, you lose, they're evil. And then
going after Gaddafi, you've had it now. Here's the thing. You and I could have put together a 7-hour Reagan movie with all the highlights, and no one would have watched it.
Go ahead and see it. And it's nice to have a Hollywood production that doesn't diminish or demonize a conservative. So, because we don't get that too often. So, Jim, glad we both got to see it. Hopefully other folks do too. And I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us. Thanks for subscribing. If you don't, please do subscribe. Tell your friends to subscribe as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.